Since the inception of Fate's Stay Night, the community as a whole has backed the power of one particular character above all others. Throughout Fate's 20 plus years of development and additions, to this day, people still defend that this original member of the cast was the strongest there ever was, and ever will be. A character who, not unlike the blue blur Sonic the Hedgehog, has stood the test of time not for substance, but for immaculate design. I am of course talking about Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is a mainstay in the Fate series, appearing across multiple tales either as a participant or in mention alone. Dubbed the King of Heroes and the oldest servant in his initial appearance, the reason as to why he is so powerful comes from a few key factors. For one, he has the original version of every noble phantasm based on an ancient relic. Things such as Gram, Durandal, Balmung, Joyous, etc. all conceptually exist in their original forms within his treasury, the Gate of Babylon. This is not to say that heroes like Artoria or Siegfried are using fakes, just merely that Gilgamesh owned these weapons at one point as well, and as a result, knows all of their capabilities and weaknesses. His second relevant power is the ability to immediately see through magic, understand it, and either dispel or deal with it in some fashion depending on how the spell is operated. This gives him an immense edge over enemies that make up for a lack of strength with the use of excessive magic. This is not to say that he is immune to magic, just that he can understand and react to it much better than others. Finally is his primary noble phantasm, one labeled to be the pinnacle of all noble phantasms. Ea, the Sword of Rupture. Ea is Gil's trump card, a weapon that can functionally tear the world asunder under its might. Though it has been represented in different ways across different games and stories, the devastating effect of it is never understated. For example, those who have played through Fate Extra CCC will know that it is a conditional instant kill attack dealing 9,999,999 damage, which is pretty much what it's like across the franchise. All of this, wrapped in the golden armor and massive ego of a king with bad motivations, makes for a formidable foe. Despite all of this, and Type Moon and the Fate community sucking him off, Gilgamesh is canonically a loser. In nearly every single appearance he has, he loses. Even when he is on the right side of things, he still finds a way to lose. In Fate's Stay Night, he loses to two high schoolers. In Extra, he loses to Liz. In Fate's Samurai Remnant, he loses to Iori and Weber. In Strange Fate, he loses Ishtar. Actually, back to Fate's Stay Night, he would have lost to Herc, but there was a child present. In Grand Order, he loses to both Overworking as well as Tiamat. The list goes on. Every single one of his appearances involves him getting his pockets run. Despite this, some people decide to massage the crater in their head and talk about how he is still the strongest. At this point, people like that are lost causes, so self-absorbed up their own ass that they can see the light through their mouth. So I got to thinking, who else could run this man's pockets and win if they needed to? Let's start by immediately fighting the allegations that I can feel coming from making this video. First off, you're still wrong if you think he's the strongest. That's not going to change, you're just illiterate and balding. Let the hairline go. Second, I do acknowledge that Gilgamesh is a very powerful servant. The King of Heroes title is well earned, and though he does get jobbed in every appearance, he himself puts up a hell of a fight. As such, this list is relatively short, containing just 35 servants of the nearly 500 that we have. Even on this list, these will be broken up into categories of maybe, conditionally, and can just straight up beat him. With that in mind, let's address the third allegation. I myself don't much care for Gilgamesh as he appears in Fate's Stay Night. If you watch any of my content, you know how I feel about him and his writing. With that said, I'm more than capable of setting aside my own biases to evaluate these things through the lens of fairness. There will always be an attached reasoning for every servant I say can do it, which you can all bicker about in the comments. So, let's get into it. Let's start with a couple of concepts that immediately give a servant an edge over Gil. The first comes from where the majority of his strength comes from, being able to discern and wield nearly any relic that would become a noble phantasm. This has its limits. Noble phantasms that are derived from things like feats, works, martial arts, or were before Gilgamesh's time are outside of this realm. Things like Shakespeare's First Folio, for instance, have the potential to catch someone like Gilgamesh off guard. However, this does not mean that a character like Shakespeare could beat him, as Gil can still discern that kind of magic. That brings us to another aspect. Just because he can discern the magic does not mean that he is above it. Some types of magic and noble phantasms that servants wield are very easily understood, but that does not mean that it's easily removed or countered. For example, I can explain how a bullet being fired works, but I can't dodge one like I had Ouroboros. Fate actually dabbles in the idea that simple spells are more dangerous because, due to the lack of complexity, there are less ways to counter, remove, or manipulate them. Additionally, any spell that just directly saps all the power from a character, regardless of who they are, puts Gil in a massive disadvantage. Next, there are some characters that are just straight up outliers. The problem with having a franchise that likes to interact with other franchises is that you get a clash of concepts that don't necessarily mesh together perfectly. You can't have two characters be the best at everything. One of them has to come out on top. I'm sure that some of you have already deduced who these are on this list. Finally, there are some servants that are just not affected by Enema Elish, or have transcended even above it. Not all of them could beat Gil, but you would be shocked at how many have the potential to do so. So to kick off this list, we're going to cover some maybe options. These are servants that could theoretically beat Gilgamesh, but there's so much speculation going into it that I will not say that they could pull it off confidently. These servants are Tezcatlipoca, Alice, Ranmaru, Van Gogh, and Khazra-Drop. Starting with Tez, he's a bit of a weird case. Tez as a fighter is wholly unpredictable, and even being able to discern what he can do doesn't necessarily help fighting him. Think of it like a fighting game. You know what Ken is going to do, and in turn how to counter it, but you have to accurately predict when this is going to happen, otherwise you get murdered in the mix-up. Tez operates in much that same way. However, Gilgamesh tends to actually have the advantage over divinities given his history of being the one who severed the connection of man and gods. Tez himself as well is weak to Enema Elish, meaning that if he slips up once, he dies. Therefore, it's a bit of a coin toss on who makes the first mistake. Next up is Alice. Alice is weird, and that's a bit of an understatement. I will just flat out say that if Alice gets hit one time by Gil, not even by Ea, she will likely die. Where doubt is cast for me comes from her magic. She is a witch in possession of various magical tools called kickshaws, the majority of which are based on fairy tales and perform actions that are beyond the realm of understood magecraft. In other words, this is possibly a kind of magic that even Gil cannot discern. This isn't even mentioning that within her arsenal are tools that have apocalyptic effects. It really boils down to if she can get these off before dying, so I believe a maybe is fair, albeit in Gil's favor. Ranmaru is likely a surprising one for some people to see show up on this list. Ranmaru hails not from history, but the Servantverse. Servantverse servants are, shall we say, anomalies. Most of them are completely immune to Enema Elish, and Ranmaru is no different. But as previously stated, just because you're unaffected by the trump card doesn't mean that Gil can't get you with anything else. The thing with Ranmaru is that she is a monster. If we dissect the joke about her being from a planet full of Ranmarus, the implication of why she's allowed to join us is because she is one of the strongest members of her entire species. Capable of inter-universal flight as well as incredible feats of agility and strength, Ranmaru is simply a bad matchup for Gil. That said, I will not discount that Gil would see something like this as a challenge and go all out from the start, which may lead to Ranmaru's untimely demise. Van Gogh is another very strange case. For her, it all boils down to her noble phantasm. Van Gogh's NP is a reality marble that changes the rules of the world. This also opens an interstellar gate that gives outer gods access to the world. Her NP is dangerous enough to be considered capable of actually ending the world should it be allowed to grow. Now, I don't care how powerful you are as a servant, you are not beating a Lovecraftian deity that is properly on the plane in a one-on-one. It's just not happening. The problem is, could she survive long enough for this to occur? Not likely, but because that possibility is there, Van Gogh is worth mentioning. Finally in the maybe tier list is Khazra-Drop. Khaz's abilities are canonically broken and have the potential to catch someone like Gil off guard. Being able to understand why your power has been reduced and that this massive gaki is going to consume you doesn't necessarily help you in that situation. However, Gil himself, when put into such a situation, should have the capabilities to deal with somebody like Khazu if he can react quick enough. Gil is a master of strategy after all, and thus could come up with a plan of escape. It all boils down to which side can react better. From the maybes, my confidence grows a bit, and we move on to what I'm going to dub the conditionals. These are servants that 100% can defeat Gilgamesh, so long as there are certain outside circumstances at play. In Fate, you don't always get dealt the best hand, and sometimes wind up on someone else's home field advantage. These conditional characters are Nobunaga, Liz, Enkidu, Erish, Ozymandias, Argent Altar, Sojiro, Bibi, King Protea, Passionlip, and Olga. Starting off with Nobunaga, we need to properly explain what a fame bonus is. A fame bonus is a buff applied to a servant depending on where in the world they are fighting. If they are fighting in a region where they are well known, they receive additional strengths and magical bonuses. Probably the most famous example of this is Heracles, who is so strong in Europe that it should be impossible for him to be summoned there because otherwise it's not fair. Nobunaga operates much the same way, but in Japan. So long as she is fighting in Japan, she is functionally unkillable. I'm aware that plot may have other plans for her character in something like Redline, but in terms of raw strength, so long as she is in Japan, she cannot lose. Gilgamesh has the advantage over her elsewhere, but the Demon King of the Sixth Heaven would come out on top in her own home country. Liz is a funny one because she does defeat Gilgamesh in one of my favorite gifts of all time. Mind you, this edition is mostly in jest and an excuse to show off this gif again. Enkidu and Gilgamesh are of equal strength. The whole reasoning for Enkidu's existence was so that he could humble the Golden King and as a result, they threw hands in the street so intensely that it felt that the world had been ended and recreated 7 times over. Mind you, there was no clear victors here. The condition is more or less who can land the fatal blow first. As opposed to the maybes which were based on speculation, this one is more canonical and therefore deserves to bump up a grade. Eresh's condition comes from location as well. If they are in the underworld, Eresh no-diffs him. Death is one of the only things that Gilgamesh feared, and Eresh, being the goddess of death, was mythologically incredibly terrifying. Her reputation as one of the most powerful gods was well earned, with even more powerful deities unable to escape her grasp. Any else that they could fight would be in Gil's favor, but if it was in he would be left to rot. Ozymandias is ironically in the same boat as Enkidu. Gil and Ozzy share many similarities, from being immensely powerful to being incredibly proud and arrogant, to being the main threat in a Holy Grail war. Gil may appear to have the advantage at first, but Ozzy can meet him punch for punch. Much like in the case of Enkidu, these mere images are dependent on who manages the fatal blow. Arjuna Altar as is could legitimately fall into the maybe category. Despite having lost the majority of his power, he is still an incredibly powerful being. But what his condition would be is if he could fight at full power. Fully juiced Gajna was only able to be defeated because we hyper-juiced Karna, who in theory could also give Gil a run for his money. Gajna, however, could easily dispatch someone like Gil at max power in a one-on-one, simply due to different levels of strength. It is what happens when you have a whole pantheon inside of you. Sojiro from the hit game Witch on a Holy Night is weird. The condition with him is that I do truly believe that he could kill Gilgamesh, but it would kill him in the process. Man is incredibly strong and theoretically could avoid the majority of Gilgamesh's attacks with ease. It's just landing that hit that's the issue. This attack is theoretically powerful enough to shatter a servant spirit core regardless of who they are, but the trade-off makes you wonder if it's worth it. The next 3 all share the same condition: BB, King Protea, and Passion Lip. If they're in the moon cell, they just win easily. BB should be a given for this one, as she is the one making the rules and passing judgment. If she wanted to, she could turn Gil into that dude at the end of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. KP is also fairly obvious. She can simply grow to a size in which she is untouchable and then shatter Gil like so much glass. Finally is Passion Lip. Trash and Crush is one hell of an ability, and even someone like Gil unfortunately couldn't do much about being cubed. Additionally, with Lip, the harder you hit, the stronger she becomes, and Gil, being Gil, would be forced into a rather precarious position to harm her. Mind you, outside of the moon cell with their limitations placed upon them, that's a whole different story for these 3. Last, we have Olga. Much like Arjuna, this is the conditional with whether this is Servant Olga or Alien God Olga. Alien God Olga functionally no-diffs the majority of the Fate roster, Gilgamesh included. It comes with the territory of being a final boss. She herself is a threat to humanity as a whole, and more than just in the foreigner sense. If this is Servant Olga though, at the time of writing this, we simply don't know enough to say, and therefore I will file this under conditional. This brings us to servants that not only would beat Gilgamesh, but would have the advantage the majority of the time. These are servants that either surpass him in strength or are simply very bad matchups for him. Something I think a lot of people tend to neglect with Fate, even outside of FGO, is that even the strongest servant can lose to one of a weaker caliber just because the matchup was bad. These servants are Musashi, Emiya, Noah, Tesla, Melusine, Romulus, Herc, Riku, Mash, and Voyager. From the top, Musashi is the actual shonen protagonist of Fate, having plot armor out the ass and the skills to back it up. At the time of her untimely demise, she was able to seal away what is functionally comparable to Unicron from the Transformers universe with just a slice of her sword. Mind you, this came with a cost, though I don't believe she needs to go that far for Gilgamesh. Musashi is unparalleled in terms of skill with the sword, and though she may be weak to Enema Elish, she very well could just cut right through it. Emiya falls into the category of a bad matchup, given that Emiya's whole deal is that he functionally counters Gilgamesh. In a perfect one-on-one, Emiya has a better shot of reliving his childhood victory against Gil. In terms of raw strength and ability, Gil does surpass him, but this is like throwing a Bulbasaur against a Heatran. Noah holds a deep irony for when he fights Gilgamesh because he actually predates the so-called oldest hero. Noah actually is old enough that he advised Gilgamesh on how to find the Herbs of Immortality, as well as having the sword that is an older version of Ea. The sword itself, for those curious, is the very same flaming sword that guarded the Garden of Eden. This, as well as Noah's grand status, give him the upper edge over his younger counterpart. Though Gil may have more raw strength, Noah carries with him the Word of God, which is strong enough to suppress the Golden Boy's arrogance. Tesla is one that seems like a bit of a toss-up at a glance, if not also a straight-up loss for the Lightbringer. Tesla, however, is such a weirdo in Fate. His whole deal is that he is the one who closed the door, theoretically stopping new servants from joining the throne. Additionally, he is modeled to be a modern Prometheus, a man who stole the light from the gods and gave it to mankind. In his case, that was electricity. Tesla inherently has the advantage over units from the Age of the Gods, as his very existence is one that counters it. Gil, not just being from the Age of the Gods, but also as a demigod himself, is naturally a bad matchup for Tesla. This is further emphasized by the fact that Tesla nullifies Enema Elish, dampening the effectiveness of Gil's trump cards. Melusine is a weird one for sure, because she's not a human, does not possess a noble phantasm Gil could have owned, and is incredibly powerful. Melusine outpaces Gil substantially, hits harder, and flows stronger. I don't think that Gil would go down easily, but Melusine, being a true dragon as well, has a trump card just like Gil. Gil's is 100% the stronger of the two, but Melusine would be able to avoid it outright. Powerful and destructive as Enema Elish is, if it can't hit the target, it doesn't matter. Not to mention that while charging something like that, Gil is completely open. She's just too fast and too furious for Uruk's champion. Romulus Kiernis. The Grand Lancer is strong enough to bring down full-on gods. This alone puts him on par with Gil at the very least, but he actually has another advantage for this fight. This rendition of Roma has functionally rejected godhood in favor of living among the humans, not dissimilar to Gil himself. But whereas Gilgamesh led a civilization, Romulus created one. This feat overshadows Gilgamesh in this department. Calling back on the fame bonus, pretty much anywhere in the world where Rome has some influence, in other words, almost everywhere, Roma gets a boost. Combining all of that together with his own natural strength, he very easily outpaces Gilgamesh. Herc is one I don't think many people would disagree with. In terms of strength, Herc is unrivaled. Even in Stay Night, Herc has the advantage over Gilgamesh and very likely could have killed him, but loses while focusing on protecting Ilia. In a fair one-on-one, Herc would put him in the invincible train. Now we get to a spicy one. Sen no Rikyu. Rikyu is one of those characters that I don't think people fully grasp the true horror of. Realistically, she should fall under the maybe category. As with many of those servants, the bulk of her strength comes from her noble phantasm. The key difference between her and the others in the maybe category falls on execution. Rikyu is a ghost in the literal sense. Amorphous, difficult to pin down, and very, very quiet. In other words, unlike other servants that have to worry about surviving to get off their noble phantasms, or have to worry about being killed while using theirs, Rikyu just gets to use hers. Once trapped inside of it, it does not matter how strong you are, what your magical abilities are, or what level of divinity you may have. You are now in her world. This is a noble phantasm that completely strips away your powers and forces you into a quiet moment with Rikyu. All the while, your strength fails, your magic disperses, and you become a victim of her grudge. Despite Gil understanding what is happening, this is a noble phantasm that leaves him completely unable to respond, promoting him to missing person. Mash technically falls under Conditional because realistically, Paladin Mash is the one who fairly easily takes out Gil. But given that this is how she is in the story at present, just gonna roll with it here. Mash in this form is in possession of a very peculiar little thing that's called the Black Barrel. If it hits you, you die. Doesn't matter who you are. On top of this, Mash just naturally has incredible defense and resilience, and while I don't think it's necessary for her to eat Enema Elish in its entirety, I think that she could technically survive it. Mash has really come into her own in terms of power as FGO has gone on, and I'm sorry to tell you this, but the Gil and Mash meme is now reversed. Here's where we get to see what I'm going to dub Fate's Potential Man. I'm sure that if there were more than 2 volumes of Requiem, we could see more of what Voyager can really do. But what we do know that he can do from Requiem is control gravity to a degree and completely destroy objects thrust at him. Voyager is a man-made creation. He is completely beyond the scope of what Gil has ever, or could ever, conceive. As a result, he is a completely unknown factor in this fight. I call him the Potential Man here because he is immune to Enema Elish, has demonstrated immense power, theoretically transcends even the gods thanks to him being an interstellar being, but we don't see any of that yet. He has the potential to do it. We just need to see more first. So that's it, right? Wrong. We are now entering the final tier of ass-whooping, what I'm going to dub the no-diff tier. These are servants that could not just beat Gil, but make it look like a massacre. If you want to debate the other characters listed here, I'll throw you a bone and let you be entitled to that opinion. The ones being listed now are non-negotiable and are what Gil checks under his bed for at night. These are characters that outclass, outfight, outpower level, outdrink, outeat, outfuck Gil in every sense. These are Ryogi Shiki, Super Orion, Francis Drake, Nursery Rhyme, Gramps, Space Ishtar, Arcroid, MHXX, Kukulkan, Wangina, Alco, Draco, and Space Ereshkigal. I'm going to evaluate 3 of these characters together because all 3 of them outpace Gil for the exact same reason. Shiki, Arc, and Alco. These are all the main heroines from the different Type Moon properties, Kara no Kyokai, Tsukihime, and Mahoyo respectively. In true Nasu fashion, these characters were made to be unkillable, perfect machines of magical death, with concepts and deep-seated connections to magic that Gil wishes he could use. Let's start with the most obvious one, Arcroid. Arc is what is referred to as a true ancestor, which, to hyper-summarize, is functionally a vampire on methamphetamine. At any given time, Arc is only using 30% of her power, and even then is feared by the other true ancestors out there. She is the strongest character in Tsukihime, which is saying something because Tsukihime has some pretty broken power leveling candidates. Should Arcuwood decide, she could turn Gil into a fine red mist before he realized what happened. Though I said Arc is the strongest character in Tsukihime, there is a character that even she thinks that she could lose to: Aoko Aozaki. Aoko is a homeless bum who just so happens to be connected to true magic. Specifically, she is the only known person capable of using fifth magic, which is described in Mahoyo by Alice as being scam magic. It is quite literally magic that allows you to cheat. This magic gives her localized time manipulation, which she at one point used to bring Sojiro back from the dead. The magic itself is incredibly complicated, but functionally allows for her to pull out on top if she is cornered and the opponent is caught off guard. For this, she has a 30% chance of beating Arc and a 100% chance of beating someone like Gil. This brings us to Ryogi Shiki. K&K is a great series and plays with a very unique concept of death perception. Additionally, she herself is directly connected to the root, which is an incredibly complicated topic to get into, but is the source of all things and phenomena that occur in the universe. This gives her an immense amount of power that permits her to, much like Aoko, cheat while fighting. Additionally, the powers of Mystic Eyes of Death Perception are powerful enough that just a singular cut is enough to kill anything. It bypasses all other rules and simply severs the lines of life. I do not care how golden Gilgamesh is, Shiki can outpace and murder him before he realizes what is happening. In the case of all three of these, none of Gilgamesh's touted abilities are effective. He may be able to comprehend what they are doing to a degree, but all of them are so beyond him that he can do nothing but submit to Nasu's favorite children. Back into the sphere of FGO, we have Super Orion, the Grand Archer himself and the one who shot down a god. Super Orion is somewhat unassuming in the fact that he is played mostly for laughs. He's a very large man who is a womanizer, but at the end of the day, he does really love his wife. But because of his portrayal, people may come to believe that he is not the pinnacle of archers. On the contrary, Gilgamesh may have a lot of things in his armory, but a wife's blessing is not one of them. Being empowered by the will of the god of the hunt, on top of being an archer so powerful and successful that the gods truly feared him, Orion could make easy work of Gilgamesh. He is arguably just one step below someone like Archer Heracles, who is a cheat character who could also beat Gilgamesh with ease. Orion folds him like a paper crane and then pisses on him. So here is one of the most surprising ones on the no-diff list: Francis Drake. Someone out there thinks that the inclusion of this nullifies every other one on the list, and that same person has a dent in their head. Anyone who has played through FGO knows that Drake is built different. Let's start with this. She nullifies Enema Elish, perks of being a Star Servant. So immediately she does not care about his trump card. But Gilgamesh is more than just Ea. He has an entire arsenal to work with after all. Drake has a particular skill attached to her that is never fully elaborated on, that functionally means that if she wants to do something, she can. It may come at a cost to her physically, but she is someone who is able to make the impossible turn possible. The prime example of this was when she, as a single servant, managed to rip the heart out of an actual god. This Viking-looking pirate. Not only that, but she lived to tell the tale, but at the cost of her being able to fight. Gil himself is no god, though he certainly likes to act like one, and at his core, he is still a servant. Drake could very easily dispatch Gil if she wanted to, turning the tides against him and quite possibly finding a way to utilize Ea against him as well. She is just built different. Now for the other very weird inclusion: Nursery Rhyme. I have been pushing the Rhyme as the strongest Fate Servant agenda for years now, and this is no different. Longtime listeners of this channel know this already and are probably sick of hearing it, but we're going through the motions anyway. Nursery Rhyme is terrifying. Her core ability that allows for her to be this scary is that she has access to all things in literature and is able to make them come into reality. Literature, of course, encapsulates a large swath of human creation, including the Epic of Gilgamesh itself. Theoretically, she could summon Gil to fight Gil. Her powers are not very well understood, but we have seen her attempt to summon actual Lovecraftian deities, whose very presence is enough to drive most mad. The argument against Rhyme comes from Gil's ability to discern magic and dispel it. Unlike someone like Aoko or Shiki, Rhyme's magic is much easier to understand. However, in a similar vein to Rikyu, this doesn't necessarily mean that Gil will have an opportunity to do something about it. There are plenty of instances in literature of someone losing all of their power, or being drained, or being polymorphed. There are an endless number of examples of what could happen to you, none of which are going to have Gil coming out on top. Rhyme solos the verse. It's just nice that she prefers happy endings and tea parties. The Old Man of the Mountain, aka Gramps, is one I find very few people would be willing to disagree with. He is functionally the concept of death itself. Gilgamesh's one true fear? Death. Gramps is a fighter that can quite literally kill the unkillable, and bring death with just a touch. Death is inescapable, and Gramps himself has proven time and again that should he wish to fight, he is nearly unrivaled. Attacks go through him as he vanishes and appears again closer than before, finally ending the fight by presenting himself before you and delivering a single cut. Gilgamesh may be able to outrun death for some time, but no one can outrun it forever. Alright, let's do another grouping of characters. Welcome to the Servantverse, where the rules are made up and the power levels do not matter. We have Space Ishtar, Space Ereshkigal, and Mysterious Heroine XX. Of these three, Space Ishtar is an entire galaxy rolled up into the Servantverse deity called Ashtart. Possessing all of this, she is able to wield the might of an entire galaxy as a weapon and functionally eliminate anyone who would dare oppose her. Additionally, she nullifies the effects of Enema Elish, meaning the one thing that could maybe give Gil an upper hand against her doesn't even work. Now here's the funny thing. Everything that I just said about Space Ishtar translates over to Space Ereshkigal as well, who is a fusion of Servantverse Eresh and our Eresh to form an even more powerful being. She is described as wielding power on par with Ishtar, meaning if Ishtar can do it, so can Eresh. Then there's the odd woman out, MHXX. X is one of the most powerful servants in the entire Servantverse, wielding a weapon strong enough to destroy entire planets with just a swing. Capable of intergalactic flight, the space cop is also in possession of light time manipulation, able to blink in and out of an area at will, making her incredibly difficult to hit. Additionally, unlike a normal servant that is bound by the limits of their master, X is a living being, albeit one from a different dimension. She has no such bonds to hold her back, and therefore can always operate at maximum capacity. Finally, she has something that gives her the edge in any fight. Toon Force. She is a gag character, a funny haha who pops in and cracks a few and then leaves. This may not seem that important, but a character like her who could beat Gil without it, having this as well, is what makes her such a threat. Next is Wandjina. Wandjina in actuality should be put in the conditional category. That is because she absolutely could devastate Gilgamesh at any given time, given that she herself is a wealth of mystery and ancient power. Should she choose to, she could vaporize him in a flash of lightning so powerful that he would never even have time to react to it. This for all purse with being a god as old as the universe, and why she is in the no-diff category. The reason why I considered conditional for her is because while Wandjina 100% could, it's very unlikely that she would. She's too kind for it, and it would take Gilgamesh functionally going on a murderous rampage in front of her for her to step in. But when she does, all that would be left is a greasy pile of melted gold and meat. Our second to last candidate is Kukulkan. This should be a foregone conclusion. She is a star in a literal sense. Additionally, she is fused with a type. She has powerful so immense that it frightens other characters that no-diff Gilgamesh like Space Ereshkigal. I do not care how delusional you are. If you're telling me that you truly think that Gil could fight the sun and win, you are beyond a lost cause. While I won't deny that Ea can destroy the planet, Kuku, who naturally nullifies Ea, can withstand it and deliver a blow so hard Gilgamesh would evaporate. Finally, we have our final no-diff servant, Sodom's Beast Draco. Draco's whole deal is that she kills servants. As a beast of humanity, it would take more than one arrogant golden boy to dispatch her, despite his best attempts. She nullifies his trump card, is naturally resistant to his attacks, deals substantial damage and curses, and is a machine that grinds servants into magical energy. It's really just a terrible matchup for Gilgamesh all around. Her authority as a beast as well gives her such an unbelievable advantage that there is simply little that Gilgamesh could even think to do to stop her. And with all of that, we are done. To all of you Gilgamesh hyperfans who think I'm just here trashing on your favorite because I don't like him, you're wrong. Gil is a great character once he's out of the villain's role, but you can take solace in knowing that even though the people just listed could beat him, the vast majority of the roster could not. I even played around with some that I thought had a chance that are also so immensely powerful, like Saber, Ibuki, and MHXA, but I couldn't find a way to make them win more than 50% of the time. Your GOAT isn't washed, he's just never going to be the strongest. And so, with all of that, I hope y'all enjoyed. A big thanks to my buddy Chris who drew the thumbnail. If you like Greek myth and hot muscly women, check out his webtoon The Street Mythology, linked down below. I'm taking zero criticism from this video, and if your response is just that Gil is stronger, it's because you have no eyebrows and less bitches. Subscribe, I guess. Bye.